Hi, my name is Peter Husey, and on behalf of the Mitchell Institute of the Air Force Association. Are they on? Can you hear now? Okay. Guess you have to lean into them. And General Deptula, who is the Dean of the Mitchell Institute, I want to thank my sponsors and guests for being here today in the fourth in our series of Space Power to the Warfighter seminars. We are scheduling for June 6th Brigadier General Cotton, who's going to be talking about persistent ISR, and we may have a colleague join him, but Kath Ryan and I will be working on that. We'll let you know. Also want to remind you that on May 6th, next Tuesday, Dr. Clark Murdoch of CSIS is going to be talking about the strategic nuclear triad and sequestration and the defense budget. And the next week after that, we have Frank Miller from the Scowcroft Group talking about the triad. Frank Rose from the Department of State is going to be talking about Middle East and European missile defense issues. And then a panel of Arnold Pranero, Mackenzie Eglin, and Mr. Harrison, who are going to be talking about, one, the overall defense budget, number two, the sequestration, and three, Harrison's going to be talking about how the nuclear triad fits into that. And those of you who are getting invitations, you may get Constant Contact, you may get Eventbrite. We're trying to figure out which you like better and which gets the better response. So please make sure when you get Constant Contact that you click on each individual date of the series and highlighted in blue so you can register, please. And let us know what you think on that. And as you know, we're also, for our sponsors here today, Bob Bell, who is the representative of the United States Department of Defense to NATO, is going to be speaking on May 29th, a private breakfast just for our sponsors on ballistic missile defense and NATO and Europe. And so those of you who would like to sign up, we're going to be doing it next door here, probably in the Bolton room. Again, that's May 29th. Bob has agreed to do that on fairly short notice. I would now like to turn over the microphone to my dean, my boss at Mitchell Institute, General Deptula, who is going to introduce our two speakers.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
Hey.
Oh, I got your papers.
Taking my remarks here. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay. Let me add my welcome to Peters for this morning's Space Forum. I'm really glad to see this kind of turnout. And right up front, I would like to thank Space Command as well as all of our sponsors for making these events possible. You know, when you think about it, given the technical complexity of operations in space, there's really particular value to exploring these issues through an open dialogue with the men and women who make this all possible. And today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss space-based communications, whether facilitating command and control or empowering global operations or providing capabilities to individuals down at the tactical level. The ability to share data anytime, anywhere is one of the core facets that defines modern combat operations. Now, none of this could happen without key space-based systems and the individuals who operate them. So to help provide further detail on this subject, I'm pleased to introduce this morning two of our key speakers. Mr. David W. Madden is the Executive Director for Air Force Space Command's Space and Missile Center, and they are charged with delivering resilient and affordable space capabilities. SMC provides technical expertise for developing, acquiring, fielding, and sustaining space systems. I think most of you in here are pretty familiar with SMC. Prior to his current position, Mr. Madden served as the Director of the Military Satellite Communication Systems Directorate, where he was responsible for MILSATCOM. Joining Mr. Madden today is retired Lieutenant Commander Justin Gans, U.S. Navy, who served with the Navy SEALs from '94 to 2006. During his time in service, he was deployed to Southeast Asia, Korea, the Balkans, Africa, and the Middle East. Right now, he's currently employed by Northrop Grumman in the field of acquisitions, divestitures, and strategic investment. Mr. Gans will help us understand the importance of the space-based communications enterprise from the operator's perspective. and he is going to go first this morning. So would you all please join me in a warm welcome for these two distinguished gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. You grabbed my notes as well.
No good deed goes unpunished.
So, good morning. Thank you for having me. All Kathleen had to do to get me here was offer me a free breakfast. The regular sailors complain that SEAL really shouldn't stand for sea, air, land. They say it should stand for sleep, eat, and lift. So, a bit about me. I graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in '94. 5 days later, I reported to San Diego, where it's sunny but quite cold, for SEAL training. Served 10 years as an active duty officer in the teams, became a reserve SEAL for 3 years. I didn't actually retire general. I was a reserve SEAL until they said that I'd be deploying as much as the active duty guys, at which point I sadly traded in my gun for a pen and my swim fins in for an office chair. And now at home, instead of driving a convertible, I have a nice big Honda minivan. But this morning, I'll try to give you some insight into my world back then and communications in an operational combat sense and all the good, bad, and ugly aspects of it. One of the interesting things about when I served was that I was really there during the coming of the digital age, and which has some incredible improvements. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And stepping back for a second, I hope you all understand the importance of being able to communicate. It's nice being able to talk to someone who isn't standing 2 feet away from you. And in the military sense, if you're not able to communicate over long distances, essentially you're totally on your own. For guys like me, what that means is that there's no calling in for air support when things go bad. It means that after a mission, the chances of getting picked up safely by a helicopter or a boat are pretty dicey. It means that when we separate from team members, joining back up together just joining back up is very dangerous because there's always a chance that we shoot each other. If you've seen the recent movie Lone Survivor, you'll see that if you can't communicate, that even when you're totally surrounded and cut off and literally fighting for your lives, it means that you can't call for help. So it's an important thing, obviously. Fortunately, in the SEAL teams, even when things are at their absolute worst, we have a little saying, which is that God smiles on SEALs. And thankfully it's true. A quick story on that, and this was before my time, but during the invasion of Grenada, a small team of SEALs, they were cut off. They got all shot up. They were able to fight their way to the ocean, but at that point, still being attacked, they were forced to ditch into the water and just start swimming out to sea. Bloody mess, pulling each other, no ability to call anyone and call for help. But fortunately, that day, God did smile on them. He kept the sharks away, and they were safely, miraculously picked up later on that night in the ocean. The other importance, which I hope I don't need to explain too much, is why we need our communications to be secure. Without other people being able to intercept, hear what we're saying, see the information we're passing. Obviously, there's nothing more than a terrorist would be then to listen into one of our plans. And in this line of business, if you lose the element of surprise, there's a good chance you won't make it home. So let me take you back to when I first started. So this is the 90s, and things were a little bit harder back then. For example, at that time, there were no digital cameras. And one of the things that we do quite a bit on SEAL missions is you have to take pictures of what you're looking at and what you see and to pass it on. So in those days, to make sure that we took good pictures, we would develop the film during a mission. So at some point, and it had to be at night because you don't want to ruin the film, at some point during the mission, sometimes outside in the rain or sitting in the mud or hiding in the corner of a building, we open up the old cameras, take out the exposed film, take out these big, heavy special canisters that we had to bring with us. We wind the film into that, find the right chemicals out of our packs, pour the chemicals in, and then spend an hour developing the film, which painful. And I'll never forget my very first communications class. We walked into the classroom and our instructor had written 2 big letters up on the blackboard, FC. And he said, "Gentlemen, this is all you need to know about communications. They're a effing crapshoot." And there were two big problems back then. One problem was SATCOM. We just had horrible bandwidth issues. And I know that's still a problem today, but back then it really was terrible. And because we're just a small handful of guys and not an entire aircraft carrier, we would frequently find ourselves at the end of the line. The other big problem was that there were no multi-band radios that can operate on the various frequency spectrums. So we would, on a mission, we would bring our SATCOM radio, of course, which unfortunately it's about this big and weighs 15 pounds. And then to talk to the aircraft, we had to take VHF, UHF radios, and that radio was about this big and 15 pounds. And then to talk to boats or ships or other units that were over the horizon, we had to take an HF radio that was, anybody, about this big and 15 pounds. And then I would carry at least two other small radios on me for inter-squad and then also search and rescue type personal situations. But fortunately, those smaller radios were smaller. And then all these radios had different antennas. And the old SATCOM antennas were quite large. HF antennas, sometimes you have to lay out a wire that's literally 10 meters long. So that could be painful. And and the batteries. So the big radios required two of the 5590 batteries, each one the size of a brick and about just as heavy. So to share the burden, everyone in the whole squad would carry 3 or 4 of these batteries. And at different times on an operation, I'd go up to one of the guys and say, "Hey, I need 2 of your good batteries." And he very happily would say, "Sweet," and he'd hand them over to me. But then 30 seconds later, I'd be back, "Here's 4 empties I need you to carry." But fortunately, things did improve a little bit, which I'll talk about here in a second. In addition to all of our communications gear, whenever we were getting ready for a mission, we had to prepare everything else we needed for the mission. So to fight, we would bring guns, usually 2 each, sometimes an anti-rocket or anti-tank rocket as well. We had to carry ammunition for those guns, and we would also carry ammunition for our machine gunners to share the burden. We would carry explosives, grenades, smoke canisters, flares. To protect ourselves, we had helmets, body armor, gloves, goggles, gas masks, knee pads. To perform the mission, in addition to the comm equipment, we had night vision goggles, thermal imagers, scopes, binoculars, computers, cameras, sometimes ropes if we're going to climb something, dive gear if we were going to be in the water. Sometimes you have to bring in stretchers, if you think you're going to grab someone who isn't able to walk, various types of equipment to keep ourselves alive for while we're out. We had food, water, and water can get pretty heavy if you're carrying a couple days worth. Medical kits, sometimes sleeping bags, parkas, and frequently we had to take all this gear and be prepared to lock it out of a submarine and tow it behind us through the water while swimming, or parachute with it all, or just load it all up on our packs and carry it. And I used to sometimes laugh that if we were going out on a long foot patrol reconnaissance mission that was stuff strapped to our chests and hanging off our legs and big packs on our back, we kind of looked like those old-time peddlers. And whatever you need, hey, here's a new frying pan. I got it. But as a mission commander, there are 2 guys I always kept close to me at all times, both in planning the mission and then during the mission. The number 1 guy was my communicator. The other guy was the navigator, just to make sure we didn't get lost. And I was always amazed at how much time we spent planning a mission around the communication requirements. It can get pretty complicated. There's all the frequencies that we use. There's all the frequencies that the other units are using in order to contact them. There's the right encryption codes, and sometimes the crypto loads will change during the course of a mission. One of the big problems was just looking at the terrain and making sure that we had a clear line of sight. In an urban or mountainous terrain, it's very, very easily you can have things cutting you off, and a lot of you probably know this, but with UHF and SATCOM radios, you have to have a clear line of sight in between you and either the other radio or you and the satellite. So we would actually plan in the mission to, at certain points, we might have to climb a certain hill just to make communications, or climb a building to make communications, or even send guys off somewhere to act as a permanent communications relay, just so that we know that we could reach somebody. We would also have to improvise. Literally, sometimes we would hoist up antennas up a flagpole or a street lamp, or do it up into a tree and then look like the Keystone Cops trying to get it unstuck afterwards. And my comm guy became a pretty good climber, just literally shimming up the side of drain spouts up a building, or climbing a tree so he could get a good line of sight shot. And you probably know this as well, but with SATCOM, because we use relatively low power radios, we don't have an omnidirectional antenna. It's a point antenna, and so we have to know exactly where all the SATCOM satellites are in the sky, and not just what direction, but what's the right azimuth, anywhere from 0 to 90 degrees, so that our antennas are pointed exactly at the satellite. So it can be painful and challenging, and you never quite know what's going to happen when you turn on the handset to talk. And literally, sometimes we would spend hours just trying to reach people, and it can be frustrating, and take turns doing it. But I'm just a quick illustration. So I key the handset. Bravo 2 Zulu, this is Bad Monkey, radio check, over. Yep, so I'm right on time. He should be there. Bravo 2 Zulu, this is Bad Monkey. Do you read me? Over. And you got to check the antenna, make sure that your wires are connected. Bravo 2 Zulu, Bad Monkey, radio check, over. And make sure the crypto load's good, the frequencies. 30 minutes later, you're ready to say, is anybody frickin' there? Anyway, but things did improve over time. I talked about the two big problems that were there when I started. The bandwidth situation improved dramatically. And although that's still an issue, it really is night and day from where it was. And you probably all know this, but I didn't know this till recently, that one AEHF satellite has as much bandwidth as 5 of the old Milstar satellites. So I think that's pretty cool and great for the guys who are out there using it. And then across the board, things got better. Our night vision goggles got smaller and better. Thermal imagers shrank and were much, much better. Computers got faster. And one of the best inventions ever, multi-band radios. And so now with 1 or 2, you could do what you needed 4 or 5 radios to do with the past. And the batteries, thank goodness, got better as well. So dramatic improvements. And I'll never forget the very first time where on an operation I actually saw live intelligence coming through. Total game changer. This situation was shortly before the invasion of Iraq, and we were preparing to take over an Iraqi ship. So it was in the middle of the night. We're on our speedboats there in the Gulf. My sniper was up in a helicopter filming with a thermal video imager the target ship, and we were there on our boats, and we could see on our computers, we could see the ship, could see any guys who were outside walking around the ship. We could see exactly where all the doors and the hatches were. We could see exactly where to place our grappling hooks. That technology saves lives, and as an officer, makes our jobs 1,000 times easier. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, this is pretty cool. This finally starts to look like it does in the movies. So hopefully we're working that way. But and then one last little story, even when everything's working perfectly and all the gear is set up right and it's all working, in an operational sense, things are never perfectly easy for the guys. There's always challenges. For example, there was another ship that we were taking over, and this one was in the middle of a pretty bad storm. But we successfully pulled up alongside the ship, threw up our lines, climbed up the side. A group of my guys went to the aft, and then I went with another group of guys to the bridge. We kicked in the door, knocked down the crew members, and as soon as we knocked down the guy steering the ship, all of a sudden the ship turned violently to one direction, causing the whole ship to lean over. And so I jumped up and standing over a couple guys who were wrestling on the floor, and I tried to straighten out the ship, looking through the rain outside, and I got a call, and they're like, what's going on in the ship? It's going crazy. Is everything okay? So I responded back, this is Lieutenant Gans, it's okay. And I was thinking back to my Naval Academy days. I've got the con, I've got the rudder or the helm or whatever it's called. And what I didn't know was that my communicator, he was outside talking back to our operational center on SATCOM. And so he's out there getting hit by the waves and trying to hold the antenna in the right spot. And then when the ship started to turn a tight circle, he had to start running the other way on the outside of the ship just to keep the antenna pointed in the right direction. But for a SEAL communicator, that's just another fun day at the office. So I'll just close with saying that anything that you do to take the pain and the weight and just the frustration out of communications is truly a godsend for our guys still fighting overseas. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for having me. This is Bad Monkey out. So.
Hard to follow that act. The difference between the SEAL and an acquisition guy is he knows who his friends and enemies are. We have no clue. And whatever we do is wrong. So if you guys can't hear me in the back, just stick your hand up and I'll talk louder as I go forward. Basically what I want to do is, the reason we kind of switched the order is he kind of talked about where, what he went through, a number of years ago, and I want to talk more about where we're going in the future to try to make things better. Most of you guys know MILSATCOM is a big enterprise. It's not just about the satellites. Most people focus on the satellites. But, first of all, there's a number of satellite systems all the way ranging from MUOS, which the Navy does, to the WGS, polar systems we put up, and advanced CHF. The reality is we have a lot of legacy systems up there now that have far outlasted our expectations, so the discuses are still up there. We talk about capacity. The WGS, one WGS satellite has a capacity of the entire discus constellation. But discus is still up there. MILSTAR is still up there. We're still operating the MILSTAR satellites as well. And so we're getting a lot of extra bandwidth on orbit as we move forward, because we're keeping those old systems operating as well. But there's more than just the satellites. The terminals are the big issue, and he hit a little bit on the terminals, both handheld and the big ones. And then also the mission planning and the command and control systems. That you need all of that to come together to actually make this whole system work. And really what's helping us as we go forward, as you know, the demand for communications is going up significantly. The more our customers understand what's out there in the commercial business and go, why can't I have that too? Because he's exactly right. The more real-time intelligence he can see right in front of him as he's moving along, the safer he's going to be. And so our challenge is to try to figure out how do we do that and do that more affordably, as we move into the future. Because as the budgets are shrinking, you watch the SMC budget over the last 3 years, we've dropped from about, in the neighborhood of $10 billion a year to somewhere around $5.6 billion a year. But yet we still have the requirement to deliver the same type of capability we have in the past. So we are challenged. However, what I tell is there's actually the three areas I talk about that are my biggest concern. Like I said, our budgets are shrinking, the threats are getting harder, and the requirement and the need is getting greater. And so, but the good news, like I said, is there is opportunities. I'm an optimist. I can't help it. There's some things that are helping us. The competitive launch environment is helping us. It's bringing down cost. The commercial bus availability. You're going to see more and more where we're using commercial buses. Instead of developing our own bus that's unique, we'll use a commercial bus. We'll build a specialized payload, bring it to a commercial bus, so we don't have to build the bus, and we don't have to build all that flight software that goes with a bus, because the commercial market's out there that'll help support us. The technology. The ASIC technology has come on significantly from when we built most of these systems. So when we do the security aspects of what we're doing, the chips are smaller and have so much more capacity. And the bottom line, even in space, we worry about batteries and power. I says, and so when we can build smaller, better devices, it really does significantly reduce our power requirements and our weight. And weight to space is a significant issue. Using commercial production cycles, really helpful. And then looking at commercial satellites, terminals, and services, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those things to use them to augment our current capability and provide more capability. And then, like I said, the SATCOM market is actually significantly better than what it was. Right now, we spend a lot of money leasing communications, and I'll talk a little bit about some things we're going to be doing in the future that significantly drive down those costs, you know, to provide the wideband capability without having to pay the wideband leasing costs that we've been doing today. And then the other area that's really helping us for change is joint ventures with our allies. I think never before, I always joke, if you really want to make change, you need a relative crisis to do it, and the budget is enabling that. So there's some good aspects, I believe, to what the budget's dropping. It's actually allowing us to do some things that we've always kind of wanted to do, but no one would have done because of the risk associated with it, because we had the money. Now they're actually listening to some ideas, and a lot of them, some of these joint ventures we're doing, I think are really going to pay off. That it's significantly reducing our ownership costs, as well as it's putting our allies on the same frequencies and systems that we're on as well. And so, like I said, there's huge opportunity there. I talked a little bit about, like I said, our strategic systems. I'll talk more about protected comm, and I'll talk a little about wideband. What we're looking at is trying to figure out when we go forward from a strategic nuclear standpoint, our systems right now, we believe, significantly meet the requirements associated with strategic nuclear comm, that command and control of our nuclear forces, and that's mainly what our protected systems are up there to do. However, what we've done is we've linked our tactical protected system into the same system. And so the tactical system has to deal with the burden of the nuclear system. And I'll give you an example. The bandwidth in advanced EHF and the whole structure, the way it's set up, is designed to operate in theater nuclear war. What that means is you've got a scintillated environment, you got to get comm through it at all costs. Well, what that really means at the end of the day is the data rate gets cranked way down so that we can assure that comm is going to get through. But on a day like today, do we really need to do that? You know, I call it the idiot box. We're working with the Navy right now. That it's called adaptive coding. Basically, we do a sampling, just put a little software on the system, do a little sampling, and it looks at the bit error rate and goes, hey, there's not a nuclear war going on. I can open the pipe up. And we can significantly increase the protected bandwidth of that system just by simply just letting the system open itself up. And then it'll sample it, so as the environment gets more harsher, it's raining, or the system will sense that, and it'll tell them, hey, I need to close the bandwidth down because I got to make sure I get the right comm through. But we're trying to do a lot of things like that that significantly increase the capacity. Let's see, the way ahead, the 15 PB basically is what we're trying to do is focus a little bit on where we're going and how do we meet the needs, and we've got kind of I call a multifaceted approach. You know, one is we want to evolve the current programs of record. We're looking hard at, you know, how do we make the strategic system simpler. Right now, it has to be able to communicate in 3 different modes: a low data rate, a medium data rate, and a high data rate mode. It's got nullers on it to take out jammers because of the tactical mission. And so what we're trying to do is say is if we can separate the strategic from the tactical out of that, we can make the strategic system a lot simpler, a lot lighter, and a lot less expensive to be able to ensure we have that strategic nuclear comm. So that's one of the first things we're doing. We're looking at evolving the protected wideband and protected tactical system, you know, to see where we can basically get more protected communications by making the systems we have, at least starting with the wideband area. How can we protect it more? You know, to change the waveform, and I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. What some of the things we're investing to change the waveform to give it better AJ, and then what we're doing for what we'd call more of a unique protected tactical system that don't have the burden of the strategic nuclear system. Because you talked a little bit about one of our biggest constraints to protect the tactical communications is when you use the strategic system, you use a thing called Type A crypto that's in that system. And really, that's the keys to our entire strategic nuclear comm. If you're out there wandering around like he is, and he's operating on our Type A crypto, and he actually loses that comm system, he actually makes our entire strategic nuclear comm system vulnerable. And then we'd have to start making some changes. So we've got, if we're going to start deploying significantly more tactical protected communications, we've got to get them on a different crypto system that's not our strategic nuclear system. And then, like I says, we want to look more at the integrated MILSATCOM, SATCOM opportunities. How do we leverage the commercial networks out there and the commercial services? similar to what we did. We call it the reverse WGS. You know, we worked with Australians and 5 other countries, and they bought into our WGS network. And what they got out of it wasn't a WGS satellite. What they got is bandwidth in our network. And we're looking at doing the same thing on the commercial side. You know, how do we buy into their network and actually give them, you know, get bandwidth out of their system so we can get it where we need it, when we need it, at a significantly lower cost. So now I'll talk about the investments. We have a thing called a Space Modernization Initiative, and that really what we're trying to do is the money we saved over the last couple of years in communications on making some good deals, you know, going forward, we're reinvesting some of that money to try to figure out how do we change our environment. If we don't reinvest some money in doing this, it kind of forces us down what we call down the clone mode. If, you know, that we have to go buy the same systems that we developed before because we haven't done any work in the technology areas to figure out how to change that path. The problem with that path is it's a dead end. The systems, we know how much they cost. We can't afford them. He says when you start looking at an advanced CHF, even with the deal we got recently, advanced CHF satellite costs $1.2 billion. And you know, try to stick that into the budget. That's a really hard thing to stick into a budget, you know, especially now. And so we're trying to figure out how do we change that? Well, the only way we can change that is we got to look at how do we do things differently. And the only way you can do that is you got to have some investment dollars to do that. And so really what we're trying to do is figure out some affordability things. And like I said, and from the affordability standpoint, like I said, the SMI Investments are looking at 3 different areas. You know, one is, like I said earlier, it's what can we do to the program of records that are out there right now and the infrastructure that we already have to make some minor changes to them to increase their capability. I talked about the simple one, the adaptive nulling with advanced CHF. The other one we're looking at, it's a ground software change, a flight software change we can make. The whole constellation will be able to take advantage of it. It's called frequency reuse. The system's set up to where nobody can use the same frequency no matter where you are in the world. And we're sitting there saying, well, if you're on one side of the world and someone else is on the other side of the world, we can reuse the frequencies. Just by doing a simple thing like that, we can get about 10% more capacity out of the system. You know, like I says, the adaptive nulling for the Navy. Most of it we were doing it for the Navy, you know, so that because a lot of we talk about tactical protected comm right now, and the reality of it really isn't kind of tactical. It's on big ships, and it's so we can push a lot of data through, you know, and so we're not worried about losing the ship. And so we can actually push a lot of good data to them, and by changing the ability to sense the data rates, these guys can get significantly more bandwidth through that's protected. In the wideband communications area, we're looking at, we got a thing called a channelizer we're putting on WGS 8 through 10 that should give it significantly more bandwidth through the system, because we've actually got it, the way the system is structured, it's actually inhibiting the bandwidth from going through, and we know how to modify it to allow that to happen so we can get more bandwidth through the system. Some of the areas, like I says, that we're looking at changing, you know, as we go in the future. And the second area is how do we go forward, is we're actually looking at a new waveform that we call a protected tactical waveform. That waveform, we've already tested it out on WGS, we've tested it out on commercial systems, and it provides significantly more AJ capability over our wideband systems. And you know, and so if we can do that, well, really all that requires is a modem change. So now we can use the current infrastructure, whether you got a commercial receiver or a military receiver. We just change out the modem, take advantage of this waveform, and you could end up with as much as 20 dB more anti-jam protection. So now we can take the systems we have and get more AJ out of the wideband systems. And then, in addition, we're looking at that waveform as a potential foundation for, if we're going to build a protected tactical system in the future, that to provide very specific tactical capability to someone, that they'll be able to use that waveform combined with a little bit more power, and you know, and be able to get significantly more protection. Because really, at the end of the day, it's a combination of 2 things. One is having the comm when you need it, and having the surety and the integrity that it's the right guy and it hasn't been interfered with or corrupted in any way. And so if you don't have those 2 things together, you really don't have comm, or you don't have assured comm. So that's what we're looking there. Let me see. From the commercial side, if you've been watching recently, we've been watching how we procure commercial SATCOM capability, and the example we've been showing people, it's taken us probably about 1.5 years to get here, but we watched right after AFRICOM bought, you know, leased significantly off of China Sat. we kind of watched that and said, you know, why did we do that? You know, and what options, and I could see why the command did it. But then we said, we got to find a better way to do this. And then, so we went out there and we spent a lot of time talking to a lot of satellite providers. And what we stumbled into is, we call them wobble sats. You know, basically they're commercial satellites that are fairly highly inclined. They're at the end of their service life. The problem is from a commercial standpoint, you got to be able to track them. I says, and most commercial providers and users don't have tracking antennas. But then you sit there and go, wait a minute, we do. You know, and so we actually put an RFP out about, I think it was about almost 2 months ago, that we're going to procure the the transponders on that satellite and have the provider actually provide the service. We're going to get the bandwidth, and then we're going to hand it over to DISA, and DISA will manage it for the COCOM. But we believe we're going to get a significant, you know, we're talking orders of magnitude, 10 times order of magnitude cost reduction by just buying the thing outright and owning the transponders. But we don't own the satellite. The commercial provider will own the satellite, so we don't have to get caught up in all the frequency and policy rules associated with doing that. But so that's one of our big initiatives, to show that we can actually start buying into the commercial networks and taking advantage of capacity they have on board. As we move forward, we're looking at things like, how do I buy more transponders on a normal commercial satellite, and then try to get bandwidth in certain parts of the world. And then the third step of our demonstrations is going to be, how do we buy a whole satellite? You know, buy a satellite in their constellation and say, maybe we want to put it in PACAF area because they don't have enough capacity, but we really don't need the whole satellite. We just need parts of it. But on the other hand, I may need, you know, capability in some other part of the world. And so we'd make a deal showing how do we get bandwidth throughout their system, and then be able to use it when we need it. Then we end up with a threefold. For wideband, we have our military systems. We have these type of, you know, hybrid systems that we have opportunity to use, and then we lease what we need on the addition. And we get out of this mode where we're leasing 80%, you know, of our comm, and paying, you know, close to $1 billion a year to lease comm, and just take advantage of what's out there. Resiliency and risk mitigation, we're investing a lot in that area. If you've been watching us, you know, with the, you know, everybody really thinks it's just about the threats. It really isn't. The threats is just one piece of resiliency. What we're trying to do is you know, looking at system failures to make sure we've got the right mix of systems out there, so that when we have a failure, we can very rapidly adapt to it. The environmental changes that we're dealing with, you know, how do we operate through them, like it says, and the adverse things. So a lot of what we're looking at is things like mixed constellations and orbits. You know, sometimes it's just being in a different orbit that nobody else is in helps give you a cue that something's going to happen. That if there's somebody out there chasing you, you'll be able to see them out there. Where right now, you know, you're in a fairly congested environment. Someone could be sitting right next to you, and you might not even know they're there. So we're looking at that. Using commercial buses. You know, like it says, that helps us out a lot with lowering cost, and also giving us more flexibility. It's what I call, you know, we kind of coined a term of our own, you know, budget resiliency. You know, by using commercial buses, building smaller payloads, and going with competitive launch opportunities, you're not trying to stick $1 billion in the budget anymore. Now these systems start getting in the, you know, in the hundreds of millions, to where now you can build more of them, and then if something happens, you have more flexibility, or you have more of them on orbit that you can adapt more rapidly, or you have hosted payloads that are scattered around in a number of different areas. So when something happens, you can adapt to that very rapidly. And then I talked about launch costs. You know, we'll be struggling with that for a while, but we've made a lot of progress, you know, in the last couple of years on driving launch costs down. One of the jokes we always had is, if you took all the studies that we've done on launch and just stacked them up, we wouldn't need the vehicle. We could just throw the satellite out. You know, he says, but that's the joy of it. But, you know, get access to space is expensive, and that's the bottom line. And assured access is even more expensive. I says, you know, when you start looking at the assets we're dealing with, we're not launching a commercial Intelsat. You know, they'll, if something happens in their business, it's money that gets lost. You know, in our business, you know, there's lives. You know, and the example I usually use is you know, you look at MILSTAR. I think it was MILSTAR 3 or 5. 3, yeah, MILSTAR 3. When we lost 3 and ended up in the wrong orbit, we actually never recovered from that. We adjusted, but it took us. It takes 10 years, 7 to 10 years to build another one of those things. And the multi-billion dollars it takes to do that, you can't recover from a significant loss like that. So having assured space capability, launch capability is critical to make sure when we put one of our payloads on there that they're going to get there where they need to. The challenges that we're dealing as we move forward, most of you, like I said, unless you've been living under the rock, it's the affordability aspect. How do we maintain the same capability and make it more affordable? When we talk to the contractors a lot, and I know a lot of you are here today, is like we really aren't asking you to take a loss. Really, what we're trying to do is come up with a better business deal and a reasonable cost associated with what we're trying to do, so that we actually can deliver capability. Because at the end of the day, when we talk at the senior level, a lot of times, it's really starting to become a binary decision. If you can't build it and figure out how to build it for a lower cost, then you can't build it at all. And what we don't want to do is be caught up in we can't build it at all. So the question is, what we're looking a lot of times for our industry partners is, how can we do it differently, not how can we do it for free. We really aren't trying to do that. Enterprise synchronization is huge. Anybody that's been in the comm business for a little while will know exactly what I'm saying. Is everybody's looking at the spacecraft. By far, the largest cost in MILSATCOM is the ground terminals and the integration of the ground terminals. 10 times order of magnitude more cost goes into the ground piece of a comm system than ever goes into the satellites themselves. And so when we have that large infrastructure there, we cannot afford to turn right and go a different direction, because there's trillions of dollars in the infrastructure that's underneath all this. And then when you decide you're just going to change out the terminals, it's just cost prohibitive. And then, like I said, trying to evolve into this post-war strategy. We're working a lot with the policy guys, trying to figure out how do we go forward with offensive and defensive space? What does all that mean? Does the system have to protect itself, or are we going to have systems out there that protect it? So if you look at the threat out there and try to design a satellite against all the threats, it's going to be cost prohibitive. It can't protect itself against everything. So is other systems going to help it and look at it more as a network as opposed to protect itself? We've got to figure that out. I said, because if we can't, it's going to be really hard to build the next generation systems, or they're not going to be relevant, in the crisis. So really, the in conclusion, kind of the key message is, a lot of you will hear about our space modernization initiatives that we're doing, both in our OPIR mission and advanced EHF, protected comm. They're critical. If we do not keep investing and trying to figure out how we're going to do business differently, what you're going to find is, again, we're going to have to keep doing the same thing. And right now, the systems we have right now are almost 20 years old from a design standpoint, and are not going to meet the future needs and be able to operate in that environment in the future. We need those investment dollars to ensure that we can keep moving forward. We really are stretching the current systems. We know these systems are going to be around for a while because we actually build really good systems. And so we're trying to figure out how do we invest in those systems to add capacity to them and capability to them by operating them in a different way, or making a modification to the software so that we can actually increase its capability. And then, like I said, we've developed this evolutionary approach, to developing these new systems with the new waveforms, and also looking at commercial pathfinders, trying to take advantage of the systems that are out there to operate. So I know that was a lot. I just wanted to kind of throw it out there, to let you know we kind of are looking at a full spectrum of where we're going in the future. There's a lot of opportunity. Like I said, I'm an optimist. That it's for the first time in a long time we've been able to use our noggins a little bit more and think about how we want to do things differently. I says the challenge is there's also a lot of other people out there that have ideas as well, and trying to figure out how we work through and coalesce these ideas and get all on the same set of music so we can march forward and we don't get caught stuck in a rut. Right now we're kind of stuck a little bit, trying to figure out how do we take the first step. But we're going to get there. Like I says, and our concerns are just like his. We just want to make sure, at the end of the day, when someone picks up the radio and tries to make a call, there's a system on the other end of it. With that, I'll close.
Why don't you come up? Justin, come on up. And please identify yourself and keep your questions to questions rather than speeches.
Where should I start, Peter? Okay.
Dan Deans with Millennium Engineering. Dave, a question for you. Excellent info. We appreciate it. Just curious, given that ORS is now in SMC, Just wondering how that factors into all this, and whether or not there's a happy medium there that you guys can focus on as you modernize and you work towards lowering the cost of access to space.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're going to see more. The Auris Office is going to be able to help us. I says as we pulled it in, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to do more demos. I says, that the age of, spending 10 years to go off and develop the technology and then putting it on orbit, it's not working for a number of reasons. First of all, the cost, and then the time, and then the third aspect is we don't bring the user along with us as well. I says, by looking at some of the ORS principles that we want to draw in to some of these systems, it'll enable us to very rapidly put something up on orbit, and then let the user start playing with it, play with the con ops associated with it before we scale it up or build more of them to support the capability. So I think you're going to see the ORS principles are really what we've been excited about from day one. It's not necessarily the ORS office. We almost didn't need an ORS office. What we needed was authority that they gave the ORS office to be able to do these demonstrations and very rapidly put stuff up in space that you actually could fail. Our system is so risk averse that, when we put a system up, if it fails, it's catastrophic across the board. But this is a way we can actually test out some concepts and some capabilities and start talking about years, couples of years as opposed to tens of years to get capability. And the beauty of most of these ORS type projects is there's a leave behind capability until we get to the next step. So we're excited about the opportunity with ORS. Go ahead.
This gentleman?
Yeah.
Aaron Meadow with Defense News. Dave, you mentioned competitive launch very quickly twice in your speech. Wanted to ask you about, perhaps your general thoughts on how the state of affairs look with that, and then specific to the events of the last 2 weeks. Are you concerned about kind of the current field of competitive launch and the lawsuit that's going on there?
Yeah. I think half the air staff's here to see what I should have started saying, I will answer any question but that one. I really need to stay out of that discussion right now while all this, with all the lawsuits and stuff are going on.
Can you maybe talk generally about competitive launch?
I'll talk about competitive launches. The bottom line is about competitive launch is SMC's strategy from the get-go was to do competitive launch. We really do believe the competition in the launch market is good for the industry. And so, trying to go through the new entry process to get new entries, and there's three companies out there that are vying for new entry opportunities. It really is a good thing, and we believe that, and we're pushing really hard to move forward to get new entries certified so that we can actually have a competitive launch environment. So that we've been working on that for a number of years, to provide that capability. So that's what was really good about the competitive area.
I am Pat Host with Defense Daily. Can you explain why, if you guys are so committed to competition, you'd award the block buy in the middle of a new entrant certification process?
No.
All right, thank you.
I'm not going to get into that. I'd love to, but I'm not going to.
Good morning. Great presentation. Ed Yarbrough with Honeywell. We kind of put subsystems on everything you mentioned and then some. Yeah. But we're looking at the way ahead, too, and serving the primes and you guys. Wondering what place, you talked about organic satellites, dedicated satellites, and the commercial aspects. There's sort of a middle ground that we're all trying to learn more about. Is there a role for hosted payloads to serve some of the MILSATCOM missions as you go forward? What place, and CubeSats, much smaller? Yeah. We make reaction wheels that are bigger than some of those CubeSats. So
yeah, I know.
Things like that.
Yeah, I think, yes, we're still struggling a little bit with the hosted payloads, but I think what you're going to see in the future is we're trying to get more payload focused as opposed to platform focused. And so I think what you're going to see is we're going to go off and figure out what's the payload it takes to do that, get the payload work started first as opposed to the bus work. And then once we figure out what the payload design is going to be and how much power, and then we'll start looking at where do we put it. Do we put it on a hosted payload because it makes more sense that it don't need a lot of power or a lot of space, or does it need its own bus? And then maybe we'll look to a commercial bus first and say maybe that there's a commercial bus line out there that range all the way from a small sat to a 5,000-pound class bus that's out there. So then we look at that, and then the third thing we'd look at is, you know, do we want to put it on one of our own systems, you know, and change out the payload. But I think what you're really going to see is we've really got to start spending more time looking at the payloads and developing the payloads, and then take the bus aspect of it as a commodity, and not have to be spending money there. And so I think you're going to find for the companies that are building the payload kind of things, I think it's going to be pretty dynamic.
Well done, both of you. Thank you very much. Question for Justin, actually. Given what Mr. Madden has said about the future of space comm, what is the one thing that you, as a former SEAL, would like to see done in the future with space communications?
Well, the one thing it would really just be able to, if you know, having the directional antennas is a huge pain, and just that being able just to stick up any sort of wire, and I know that they're working on that in some areas, but then just not having problems with dropped communications, with being limited as to what we can send. One of the things we carry into the field are these data burst devices. So we spend all this time typing stuff into the computer and then load it into a data burst device, which shrinks it all and then blasts it. And one reason why they do that is for security reasons, so it's less time transmitting anything. But all that just takes time. And in a combat scenario, communications is a means to affect the mission, and it's sort of a necessary evil. So anything that can change how much time and pain we have to focus on other stuff rather than staying alive is important. So.
Yeah, it's funny because we have a category for them. And some of you guys heard us say there are disadvantaged users. And we actually spend a huge amount of time talking about that. That's because it's easy to provide comm to an aircraft carrier. It really is. I says, they got big antennas, they got lots of power. They can, I says, but when you're dealing with a guy on the ground who's trying to communicate with a satellite that's 22,000 miles away, and he can't carry big antennas, and he can't carry a lot of power, to transmit. It's a pretty sporty adventure. Trying to figure out how to make it so that they don't have to carry all those batteries. We've been focused on the battery issue more than anything. How do we not have to make them carry 20 batteries along with them along the way?
Mr. Madden,
yeah.
Mr. Gans,
yeah.
Thank you so much. You did wonderfully.
Thank you.